I have 5 income streams, 2 properties, a business that hasn't given me any money in 3 years, a startup that's offering me equity, and a W-2 job that's holding this all together. This is the first time I'm going to lay everything out, all of the pieces together, and this is the plan. Let's go ahead and get into it. Hey guys, it's Kerry, and last week we talked about how I run this YouTube channel, the costs, the processes that I have to make me successful, and the ongoing costs actually of what I do for that channel. So if you haven't watched it last week, I definitely encourage you to go look at it. This week is going to be different. This is the first episode of The Plan, which is a new series in which I'm putting all the pieces together. So that would be not really a story-driven approach, but more of a plan-driven approach on the overall picture. So you'll see things from like my income streams, my businesses, my properties, and just how the strategy pieces them all together. The series is going to work by me providing an update basically where we left off. And this is going to be the first episode, so there is no update. Here's how the series works. Each episode is going to start off with the current plan of the last episode, and then the current episode is actually going to tell you what changed and why, and then present to you the actual current plan that's going on. And then the next episode will pick up from there. If you're able to watch these in order for this whole series, then you'll see my plan evolve over time and be able to follow my journey as these type of things roll in. I'll drop an episode for this every time something actually changes my financial plan. So for this episode, it's going to be a little bit different because we don't have a previous episode to go off of. So I'm going to fill you guys in on the entire plan and how it's going to look. To start, we're going to look at the big picture. So let's go ahead and hop into that. So to start that off, I want to talk about what this channel's been mainly about, and that's to get to financial freedom. So let me explain what financial freedom means to me, because I'm pretty sure it's different for everybody. But financial freedom for me isn't just a number. It is to be able to pay for my living expenses without needing to actively trade my time to pay for this living expenses. AKA, I can leave my job and still have my living expenses paid for. Once that is covered, then I can actually be able to free up my time to work on things that I'm passionate about. I can work on my own business, I can travel, I can just chill and be, and it even frees me up to do something that I've always wanted to do, which is to be able to create generational wealth to pass down to my children and other members of my family so that they can start off their lives not having to worry about making it or breaking it right out of college or right out of high school if they decide to go to college. To put it in perspective, to me, it's kind of like being able to create my own like welfare check or even social security or whatever you want to call it, because at this point I have enough to pay for my living expenses, and it allows me to free up my time to do things that I want to do, and I'm not working to survive. I'm actually working because I want to work, and that's just kind of the goal that I really have going forward, and it's the main big goal. As far as the actual like target itself, I'm working with myself, my financial advisor, and my wife to actively put a target on this that we can reach, to be able to say that we made this goal, because that's something that evolves with life. It is not necessarily the most straightforward thing to really like have as a number, and it's always changing. So that's the destination, and I'm going to go ahead and get into showing you like where I started. I know you already had a little bit of a peek to this, but this is to put it all together and show you the original plan I was working with. Going into 2025, I didn't have a fully fleshed out plan or anything, but I did have a goal in mind that I just told you about earlier. I had my own strategy that I've kind of laid out in bits and pieces on these videos, and then I did end up bringing a financial advisor in around June 2025, but even then it takes time for them to be able to curate a full plan, so it was really still going off of what I had so far. So the goal was just as described, right? Financial freedom and enough income from the things that I've built to be able to cover my living expenses without needing my W-2 job. And obviously at that point, work becomes a choice. So the strategy for it was pretty straightforward to me. Is to use my W-2 as fuel, and every dollar I got from my W-2, and I wouldn't be saying every single dollar, but obviously I wanted to put my money to work that I got from my W-2 and be able to put it into income generating assets and businesses. So if I stack enough of those, then I would be able to provide my living expenses off of that and not need my W-2 as fuel anymore, and it can replace my W-2. Then I'll have a choice on keeping the W-2 or moving forward. To give you guys a full picture on it as well, my W-2 isn't just the paycheck, right? There are other things that I'm doing with it that I'm pretty sure it's not necessarily spectacular, but it's something that you should know, is that I have a 401k employer match. I also have an HSA through my employer as well. I know they're not exactly the most exciting things to talk about, but they're a part of my foundation that really helps me be able to move forward. They also help with the retirement contributions, because with those, they're building long-term. And obviously the HSA is going to be used, which is a health savings account for those who don't know. It's going to be used for any health expenses that I have going up. So it's like a way to be able to build my own assets there, but not have to actively think about it because they're automatically being taken out of my paycheck. And we'll get into that a little bit later, but I do think it's important to at least acknowledge that when it comes to having a W-2 job. On top of that, for 2025, I had a few things actively helping me towards my strategy. The first thing was the property that I was living in. I had bought it in 2023. I told you I spent $84,450 upgrading it. The plan was to turn it into a rental property once I moved into my second home. The second home was on the plan for 2025. I was waiting for enough RSUs, or restricted stock units, to vest, meaning that I could sell them or own them at Chewy in the right opportunity to really show up. I expected it to take a while like it did for the first home I got, because I think it took me around 4 months to grab that, but it actually came a lot faster than I thought. Once I did end up moving out of my first home and making it a rental, I knew that it was going to be cash flow negative because the rental rates for the home were lower than the mortgage. But my hope was that the mortgage rates would end up dropping so I could lower my rates and then be able to be more competitive and be cash flow positive. Unfortunately, the rates did not move still today to be lower than what I had it in 2023. Then there was Brick. This was a low-cost franchise that I found, and the franchise itself was just around vending machines with portable phone chargers. And at that time, I had bought out my partner earlier the previous year of August 2024. And I still had one venue in August, not in August, but in 2025, starting the year. And at that point, I didn't have any money for investing into that business to help people do sales for me to get the machines placed. So it was really just on hold for me until I could find the right opportunity to be able to invest in the company again. And then other than that, that was pretty much it, because a W-2 was fueling everything else. A second home allowed me to convert my first home into a rental. Brick was on standby, and I just started my financial advising relationship, and they were creating a plan and still putting everything together. That story for the financial advisor is in Getting a Financial Advisor episode, but that was the original plan. Now we want to go ahead and move on to the results of what actually happened, wrapping it up for 2025, but also transitioning in today as of March. And for the rental property, we're going to start with that. The rental property, I already knew going into 2025 that I was renting the property out for $2,500, even though the mortgage was $2,730, and it was cash flow negative from day one. I was hoping that the rates would drop, and we could see that in the episode of buying my first property. Making it rental ready is another property, and then the rental reality. Spoiler alert, as I said earlier, that did not happen. The rates are still high, still higher than when I bought in 2023. The numbers ended up being $25,200 is the rental income, and then the expenses was $27,600. So as you can clearly see, $2,416 is the negative cash flow. Also, the rates didn't drop. Obviously, that means that I didn't get to lower my rate on my mortgage. But the cash flow isn't the entire picture. In 2025, I had also built $5,233 in equity through just paying down my mortgage. Net position on the year is still positive if you factor that in, for $4,017. I don't know why I was trying to throw 100 in there. It looked like I was losing money every month, but when you factor in everything, I'm still making some type of gain, at least in my net worth, when it comes to being able to have more equity in a home. So currently today in 2026, the tenant moved out a little bit early. So we have a new corporate tenant coming in, and I was able to move the rent up from $2,500 to $2,800, which is great. The electricity cap, as we talked about in one of the episodes, is actually written into the lease. So if they go over on electricity, then I can go ahead and charge the tenant that extra, so I won't be upside down. And then the internet is still passed through. The mortgage ended up jumping up because of property taxes increasing for the year. So now it's at $3,000 $1,051.97 after the escrow has been adjusted. So what ended up changing is, like I said earlier, is the cash flow picture improved with the new lease terms. It's still a little bit negative, but it's not as negative as it was before. The other thing that I'll say as well, I was trying to look through my notes and I'm clearly failing, was that I am deciding to go ahead and implement a reserve for repairs on the property, because I was going to use our personal emergency fund to do so, but I'm thinking the rental deserves its own because of some of the things that we've had to do for repairs on the property, and it would just be easier to go ahead and allow it to have its own reserve and be able to use my business funds from the freelance client to fuel that. And I'll get into that in a second, but that's just something that I am doing as a lesson learned for my rental property. Now for Brick, my vending machine business, as I told you earlier, we had the one placement that was still active, and I ended up buying out my partner the year before, and we had that full story in the Brick business episode if you want to check it out. But not currently, but at that point for 2025, I had $15,379 invested since 2023, and then the revenue is still $68.52. But you know, it is what it is. What ended up changing was the venue placement that I did have, the one that I had, closed down on September of 2020. But the web client, which I'll get into, like I said, which is the freelancer in a moment, is what changed everything for me in this situation. Because my advisor helped say to me, you know, fund your business expenses from business income instead of using your personal income. So I'm using, and I have used, the freelance income from the web developer to actually hire another freelancer to do advertising for me and outreach to these venues to get placements. That campaign ended up ending, and the results were I only got one active placement out of it, but I did get a big lead that is in Houston Restaurant Association. He's on the board there. So I'm hoping to keep following up with him to see if he can get me in to the restaurants to be able to place my machines in his big network of establishments that I could get into. But for those who do know the area and it's local to where I live, out in Grand Prairie on Joe Pool Lake, there's a place called Rockin' S Bar and Grill in Grand Prairie. And this is actually pretty big to me because it was the first place that I've been able to kind of see and actually be in business with, that I went to as a kid. This place closed down when the lake flooded, and now that it's back open, it's just a big deal to have my machine in there. So if you're around the area, go check it out. But other than that, that's pretty much all I got going for Brick. We can go ahead and move on to my current job, W-2 job at Chewy. Right now, it's been stable. I haven't had any issues with it. It's been fueling everything that I have going on. Currently, it's still the anchor today, and I just got my performance evaluation back, and it looks like I'm getting top performer, so that's great. And other than that, nothing has changed. The W-2 is doing exactly what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to cover me while I'm trying to get on my feet to be able to be financially independent. The last thing that I want to cover that is in my original plan was my original home that I bought in 2023. So in 2025, I had in the plan to be able to purchase a new home once I got my RSUs to vest. And while waiting on the RSUs, I was going to be trying to find the right home. And I expected it to take a while because my first home that I bought in 2023 took me like 4 months to really find. But this one took me like 1 month to find, and it was just really fast. So I ended up getting a home from Ashton Woods, that's the builder, in Forney, and the purchase price was $375,000 and appraised at $424,000 the day I closed. And I was also able to lock in the 4.99% interest rate on the home instead of the usual 6 or 7% that we were seeing for mortgages in 2025. So all of that was fully funded from the RSUs, or restricted stock units, and you can see that story in the second property episode. What's changed from that is I moved into my new home. I converted the old home, or the first home, into a rental property, and the sequence went pretty smooth. Other than that, it was just quicker than I was expecting. Let's go ahead and get into the unexpected parts, or the unplanned parts of 2025 and what happened. So So we got the web development client in which I am pulling in freelance money from it. And this one I just genuinely didn't plan for. It was me talking with my electrician. He asked if I still coded, and we ended up meeting with his boss, and his boss ended up taking me on as a freelancer to do some work for them to be able to get me $3,000 a month. And the client's still paying me today. If you want to check that out, that's in my first web development client episode, and it has the full story there. This is the single thing that really helped change my trajectory because it allowed me to fund business income fund business expenses from my business income onto the marriage and finances. Ended up getting married on November 10th of 2025, and this ended up changing my financial plan again because now it's no longer just my plan, it's our plan. One of the first things that ended up changing was the emergency fund went from 12 months worth of living expenses down to 6 months. But when we combined our expenses, it ended up being roughly the same amount. But we also ended up having our first goal together of having our public wedding on July 4th of 2026, and that had a $25,000 budget, but we ended up fully funding that one. Other than that, the last thing we'll talk about is I ended up getting pitched another opportunity that I was not looking for, which was to work for a startup and give them a few hours a week and be able to get back equity within the company. So right now I'm giving them about 5 to 8 hours a week. I signed the NDA, so I can't really go into any more detail on what they do or who they are, but I am getting $10,000 shares that are vesting over the next 12 months, and that'll be worth about 0.1% of the company. The reason I went with this is because I'm investing a little bit of my time, but obviously that could be used elsewhere. But I'm really thinking of this as a way to be able to gain experience because I want to do my own startup one day. And this is very close to being a early age startup. And this is how I can see how things are working from ground zero without having to risk a bunch of my time or my capital. So it's really more than just the cash for me right now, even though there's no value to this. It's really more about the education. And then I've also went over it with my advisor, and they're behind me with the plan. So we're all in. I wouldn't say all in, but we're definitely in on the startup. Now that we have talked about the results of 2025 kind of up until now, I want to go ahead and lay out this new framework for you guys so I can make it clear on how I am going to have this look for my financial plan going forward. And this is how it's going to be organized. I want to center it around the goals that I have going on, and these goals are going to have vehicles tied to them. And the vehicles that I am going to be using as an analogy here, basically the things I'm doing to pursue these goals. And for each vehicle, I want to go ahead and be straight up honest about 2 things on them. The risk I'm taking, meaning what I'm giving up and what happens if my underlying assumption is wrong, and the timeline, meaning that I want to go ahead and specify as best I can, because not every single one is going to have a timeline, but specifying as best I can when I'm expecting to see results, and basically have that be the approach that I have to be able to explain things going forward. We're going to start with my first goal and the main goal, which is to be able to be financially free, or basically create my own social security check for myself, but not having to retire for it. And this is going to be income that covers my living expenses and it makes my W-2 wages optional for me to use. Everything I'm about to walk through right now is going to help me build to that goal. So the first one I want to talk about is the safety net vehicles, is what I'm going to categorize it as. So this is protecting the plan, so the other bets are survivable that I have with this. The first one is the emergency fund. So I'm targeting, I have written down like 50,000, but realistically after talking with Slay, my wife, she was like more comfortable doing 45,000 because 60,000 seems like a lot to keep in cash, or 50,000 because I can't read things correctly, but that'll be about 6 months worth of expenses. We're currently sitting around 37,000. We're still building it. The rental turnover and the mortgage hit increases at the same time and it kind of slowed us down. But the risk here is if this isn't in place and something breaks and we have to sell off things like the 401k and dip into assets we don't want to dip into in order to keep ourselves afloat, which we don't want to risk. And obviously the timeline for this one is going to be as soon as we can possibly do it without obviously depleting the other funds, right? So like we'll just take whatever excess cash we have and throw it into here. The next thing I wanted to talk about, or the next vehicle, is the insurance. So we have disability insurance I'm paying for myself at $24.45 a month. And this is to cover the other 40% of my salary because my job only pays for 60% if something were to happen to me and puts me on disability. And then we have the IUL, which is sitting at $300 a month. And that also has the cash value component to it, which is a nice bonus. And then we have the employer benefits that come through Chewy. So the risk here is that the gaps in coverage could leave, my financial plan vulnerable again. So I'm still working with my financial advisor to get the full picture here on the insurance, but it's something I thought was worth mentioning. The other thing that we talked about earlier is to be able to create a rental reserve fund. And this is new because I wanted to build a dedicated cash buffer for the rental. I don't really think it makes sense for us to keep pulling from our emergency fund to fund the rental when that emergency fund should be for personal and not business, because at the end of the day, the rental property is business. So for this, it is a timeline to still kind of do it as soon as possible, but I still need to even figure out what a good number would be and what makes sense there. The other vehicle that I will say as well is to have the financial advisor. So I'm paying the financial advisor $125 a month for an active relationship between us, and we're still building a full plan together. It's not fully polished yet or fully baked, but the value here that I'm getting from them is to be able to pressure test all of the things that I'm doing and make sure I'm going in the right direction. The next thing I want to talk about is the other types of vehicles that's helping fuel this number one goal, and that would be the income building vehicles. So the first one is my W-2. I'm making $137,000 a year roughly at Chewy, and I also have restricted stock units or RSUs on the schedule that are vesting right now. I have 4,108 units of Chewy across all 4 active grants that I have right now that have not vested yet. At yesterday's stock price, which is I believe March 21st, the price is at 96,000 across all of those stocks. Obviously the risk here is if I lose the job, then all of this that I'm working for could be in jeopardy until I find another one. And then I also can lose the stock. The timeline for this one is obviously I'm making the money right now, but I want to be able to stay here until I don't necessarily find value anymore. And that could be because I don't need the money anymore, or because I've learned everything that I want to learn from the company. The next income building stream that we want to talk about is the rental property number one. So the first property that I have is cash flow negative, but it's equity positive. The new lease terms have improved me from being shielded from surprise electric bills. And then the risk here that we still have is the rates didn't move, so it can still be cash flow negative. So if my income stops coming in, then I will need to figure out how to keep paying the mortgage month over month, and I could end up needing to sell the property when I didn't want to. And the timeline for this is to just hold it. I don't really ever plan on selling any of my properties if I can help it. And if I do need money from it, I'd rather just refinance it and be able to take the money out of the equity. And then we have the next vehicle, which is my primary home. I bought it for $305,000, like I told you earlier. It appraised for $424,000. And then the mortgage rate is 4.99%. Now the risk here is it's my largest asset. So it's the largest liability I have because I owe money on it still. But same thing here for all my real estate. The plan is long-term on the timeline. Now we have the web development client. There's $3,000 a month. The risk here is that it's a single client that I'm depending on for this income. So if this ends, then Brick loses its funding and my monthly buffer shrinks significantly when it comes to business expenditures, because it's pretty much nothing that I will be bringing in. And the timeline for here is to keep going on this as long as possible until I need to take those hours back to do something else. But as it stands right now, I don't think I have anything that would be competing with the hours for this. I just want to make sure that this client stays steady, because one client is a huge risk if I'm depending on that income. The next one we have is the Brick business. It only has one active placement. The outreach campaign had ended. So I'm following up with the Houston contact to hopefully place more place more machines. But right now the risk is I've invested over 15,000 and I haven't really had enough revenue to cover that money back or even become cash flow positive. So the assumption here is that hopefully once they are placed, the demand can be reached. And if I'm wrong, obviously that capital is just not coming back. So the timeline for this is hopefully by the end of this quarter, I can make a decision on moving forward or getting those placements and kind of seeing where to go from there. The next thing is the startup equity. And I know this is running long. It's just a lot of things that I have moving forward right now, but I do want to list them all to you. The startup is 5 to 8 hours a week, 10,000 shares over the 12 months, and then obviously no cash there. The risk is that, the 5 to 8 hours that I'm giving to the startup could be done somewhere else. And then for this, the timeline's not really fully defined. It's just because the startup world is very fast moving or really just very unpredictable. And right now I have a soft deadline of us at least being ready to try to get our first round of funding in 2027, and I can kind of check in back then. And then the last thing that I have right now is this YouTube channel. So right now I'm paying $700 a month. I already put in costs for $500 of equipment. That's a one-time cost. The risk is the ongoing time that I spend and ongoing money that I give the editor, and I'm bringing in no revenue right now. But the assumption is that I'll be able to build an audience and hopefully be able to reevaluate this next year to start bringing in money. But as it stands today, I don't expect to make any money in 2026 because these type of things take time. Now, this is a second goal that we have, and the reason that this one is not necessarily coupled under financial freedom is because I don't necessarily need this to become financially free, but it is something that doesn't necessarily hurt me becoming financially free. It could just slow me down a little bit depending on how we do it. But it is a goal that me and my wife have. It was something that she wanted to do and I agreed that we should do, and we set it together, decided to make it a priority. For this goal, we have no active vehicles just yet. Right now we have other priorities, which is to get our emergency fund back in check, to reevaluate our insurance coverages, and to just get ourselves kind of prepared for just getting through this year. But we do have a timeline on this goal. We want to be able to have this goal completed within 3 years. So it'll be something on our radar coming up either this year to plan for in 2026 or early 2027. One last goal that I want to mention is that I want to be able to start my own company, but I'm going to call this a de-emphasized goal because I cannot start on this goal until I become financially free or have my financial freedom, because I don't think it's worth the risk of this goal to be able to really get financially free. I don't want to depend on this goal for that. This is something that I want to be able to have either pass or fail or survive or not, or be successful or not, and it not impact my light went out. How embarrassing is that? But when it comes to this goal, it won't have any vehicles or anything really attached to it until we get our first main goal completed. But it was something that I want to mention that is another goal that I'll have after I complete that first goal. So I know I threw a lot of words at you, but I'll go ahead and put it together to give you not just the plan, but the full picture by being able to see where my money goes as well as where my time goes. To sum up how my money is moving around, the total monthly income that my household brings in, $16,200. That's my W-2 take-home pay, my wife's take-home pay, the web client, the rental income that goes into the mortgage. So it's roughly a wash of that income right now, but it's everything that we have coming in. Beyond the take-home pay, there's stuff that we have working in the background, like we mentioned a little bit earlier. From our 401k, we're putting $632 a month from a paycheck into there. And then we're getting $316 from my employer because they have percentage match. So every dollar I put in, they give me 50 cents up to a certain percentage, and I'm taking the max percentage. And then for the HSA, I am putting in $154 a month, and then my employer is matching half of that, so it's $62. And let's see, my wife also has disability insurance as well, that she's paying for through her employer, which is cost about $37 a month. Those aren't flashy, but it is part of the numbers that we have. Our total monthly expenses is $16,250. Both mortgages, all of our living expenses, the insurance, our advisor, everything that we have. So the gap between our income and expenses, that's what the plan we're working with, is to close with the new income streams while keeping our expenses, at bay. Let me also give to you the numbers that we have so far on all of the assets we accumulated between all of us. $66,600 in the 401k right now. And then the HSA still has around $1,000 in it, but that fluctuates depending on our medical needs. And then I have 2 brokerage accounts. One is in Titan, which is an active management fund brokerage that is actually helping me be able to actively manage my investments on there. And then I have about $4,400 with them. And then I have an account on Robinhood that is at $3,400 right now. And then the emergency fund is spread across 3 places. So the IUL itself has the cash value in which I could borrow from. $17,000 of that is going to be used towards our emergency fund. And then we have the Titan also has a money market component to them, and that is sitting at $10,000. And then Capital One is also sitting at $10,000, which is Soleil's savings account that's paying, I think, 4% over there as well. And that puts all of those together at $37,000 for our emergency fund. And our net worth today with the properties as well is $51,000. And that can change depending on the value of the property because it can go up and down. In real estate, everybody knows that. So this is also included emergency fund, the investments we have, minus all of the debt we have. This also includes our car loans, student loans, the solar loan I took out as an investment on the rental property. So everything. That's a pretty good and useful snapshot of where we're at today. We can also briefly go over how my time is spent. This one is much simpler. So the time I have is the W-2 job at Chewy, obviously the normal 40 hours a week. The web dev client is about 10 hours a week because I give them 40 hours a month. And then Brick is maybe like an hour a week or so, if that, because we talked about that in the episode, but it's not something I want to spend a bunch of time on. And then we have YouTube. And I would say I probably spend about 6.5 hours a week on that. It just really fluctuates depending on YouTube. Sometimes it takes me a long time to write episodes, sometimes it doesn't. And that all adds up to roughly about 60 hours a week. And the rest of it's just life. Not every single hour has to be spent making money, but this is how I'm spending all of my time that is making me money. That's the full picture. Now, let me go ahead and move on to what I actually have my eye on to look out for in the next episode of this series, but it's not guaranteed. It is something that I do want to give my thoughts on now. Before I dive too deep into what I'm looking out for, the things I want to cover first is usually the lessons. And one of the first lessons I learned, and I talked about this before on this channel, is that opportunities that I get to me are almost never planned, especially the best ones that I get. The web dev client was very pivotal for me in 2025, and that just happened off a casual conversation. And the equity in a startup is something I wasn't expecting. This literally was because I went to Afrotech and ended up being reached out to by a startup person out there just by networking. So this was definitely 2 things I just wasn't expecting, but I did have the time and the opportunity to be able to take on these new things. And I think it was very pivotal for me to be able to do so. And I'm glad I was able to do so. The second thing that I will say is that plans don't die, right? Just because things didn't go the way I planned, it doesn't mean the plan dies. That means it has to adapt. For example, the rates didn't fall for my rental property, so I had to adapt by trying to get creative with the electricity rates. And then Brick didn't scale the way I wanted, so I tried to go with an approach to be able to have somebody reach out on my behalf to help me with the business. And it was just interesting because I don't necessarily view those as a failure. I view it as a learning on how something works and how to adapt going forward. Now, as far as what's on my mind between now and probably the next update is a few things that I kind of had is just trying to see and follow up with that Houston venue for Brick, because right now Brick is, I wouldn't say my biggest drag, but it's been one of the things where I invested a lot of money and haven't really seen any returns. And it's been probably one of my longer investments that haven't made any money. And I'm really hoping to be able to turn that around with that venue, not the venue, but the owner, to be able to get into other venues. Otherwise, I might have to sit there and try to make a tough decision on closing something down. And the other thing is I want to be able to increase the rental reserve fund. I didn't have one before, but now I'm starting to see the importance. That way I don't have a lot of unpredictability when it comes to the rental property and having surprise bills that I need to pay for with my personal emergency fund. Other than that, it's really just getting a clear picture on the expenses I want to pay to be able to get financially free. But other than that, I think that's pretty much it. Well, that just about does it for this episode. And like I said before, usually when it comes to this series, it'll only really be coming out whenever the plan shifts due to some change going on. So don't expect to see these every week. They might come at a minimum every quarter. But other than that, we'll see as things go when the next episode of this series will be. But regardless, I'll see you guys next week. If this is your first episode, I highly encourage you to watch any of my previous episodes because they're all from the catch-up series, and you can see in detail on some of the topics I brought up here because it's a lot to put into one single episode. And I'm curious for those. Feel free to drop a comment if you have your own version of financial freedom. What is it to you? Is it a number? Is it a lifestyle? I just want to see. But as usual, I'll see you guys next week. Thanks for watching Mickey's Financial Journey YouTube channel. Peace.